The dawn broke over the jagged mountains like a warning, pale sunlight slicing through the gray mist that clung to the war-torn valley. The forward operating base, a sprawl of sandbags and rusted containers, sat like a stubborn scar against the rocky terrain. The air smelled of gunpowder, diesel, and sweat, the faint echo of distant artillery reverberating through the canyon walls. Inside the perimeter, soldiers moved with precise, measured steps, their eyes scanning the horizon, weapons cradled and ready. Among them, a young woman stood apart, her auburn braids swinging against the weight of her tactical vest. Her name was Aurelia Veyron, and even in a place hardened by countless battles, she radiated a presence that was impossible to ignore. Aurelia's fingers tightened around the grip of her custom Scar-L rifle, its metal cool against her calloused hands. Every inch of her uniform, every strap and buckle had been meticulously adjusted for mobility and efficiency. She had trained in the harshest conditions, running drills in deserts that burned under the sun, forests where shadows could swallow a person whole, and mountains where the air itself clawed at your lungs. Her body carried the memory of countless simulations and operations, her mind a steel vault of tactics and strategies. Yet here, among the hardened SEAL units stationed in this unforgiving theater, skepticism greeted her as sharply as the morning wind. Commander Leonidas Cortez, a man whose reputation stretched across continents for feats in combat and tactical brilliance, watched her with narrowed eyes. His jaw was set, the line of his mouth hardened by decades of war, and he did not easily trust those outside his unit. Next to him, Master Sergeant Vladimir Dragunov, whose icy gaze could unsettle even the most seasoned soldiers, muttered under his breath about imposters and charlatans. Aurelia, aware of the scrutiny, did not flinch. She met their stares with unwavering calm, a subtle defiance burning in her amber eyes. She knew the judgment she faced, the whispers behind her back, and yet she stood poised, every movement deliberate, as though she had anticipated this exact moment. The base itself was a fortress of tension. Sandbags lined the perimeter like vigilant sentinels, and barbed wire caught the early light, glinting like faint threats. Military vehicles, armored and scarred from previous skirmishes, were parked at angles that allowed for swift deployment. The chatter of radios punctuated the steady rhythm of boots against gravel, creating a low hum of readiness. Even in this organized chaos, Aurelia noticed the small inconsistencies, the subtle signs of an enemy watching, of intelligence being misread, of danger moving like a shadow just beyond sight. She had come not for recognition, but for purpose. A few days ago, while intercepting encrypted communications, she had discovered hints of an ambush that threatened the base. Her warnings, delivered with precision and confidence, had been met with doubt. They called her reckless, accused her of bluffing, of pretending to belong. But she had learned long ago that courage was silent until it needed to speak. That action spoke louder than words, and that sometimes trust had to be earned in the fire of necessity. As morning unfolded, the base settled into a tense quiet, the kind that precedes a storm. Aurelia remained in the shadow of the armory, her gaze sweeping over the soldiers preparing for drills and patrols. She allowed herself a moment to check her weapon, to memorize the layout of the base, to catalog weaknesses and potential threats. Every detail mattered. Every second could tip the scales between survival and disaster. Around her, the unit moved with disciplined precision, unaware that the storm she had foreseen was already gathering on the horizon. In the stillness of that early hour, Aurelia Veyron stood ready. She was small compared to the seasoned warriors around her, but in her posture, in the quiet confidence of her movements, there was a promise of something far greater. A promise that soon the walls of doubt, suspicion, and judgment would be shattered, not by words, but by courage, by skill, and by a mark that could never be faked. The war had already begun. She was simply waiting for the first spark to light the fire. The first shots came without warning, tearing through the fragile calm like lightning through steel. Explosions rocked the perimeter, throwing sand and debris into the air, and the acrid smell of burning fuel mixed with gunpowder choked the senses. Soldiers scrambled to defensive positions, their disciplined movements cutting through panic like a practiced dance. Aurelia Veyron, momentarily restrained by the suspicion of her peers, felt the chains of doubt around her tighten. But the moment the first enemy grenade landed near the barracks, she didn't hesitate. Her hands moved to her Scar-L rifle, even as Master Sergeant Dragunov barked orders at her, his voice sharp but edged with disbelief. The attackers were mercenaries led by the notorious Colonel Svarog, a rogue tactician whose reputation for ruthless ambushes had spread across continents. They moved with lethal precision, exploiting every weak point in the base's defenses. Sandbags erupted in clouds of dirt, the echo of gunfire bouncing between the mountains like the roar of an angry god. Aurelia's heart pounded, her mind a calm, calculating machine amidst the chaos. She could hear the fear in the voices around her, the trembling of soldiers who had never faced an enemy this calculated. And yet she remained focused, scanning, predicting, calculating. Despite being detained in the armory, Aurelia's eyes found the weak points, flanking positions the mercenaries had missed, gaps in their cover, a sniper nest hidden behind twisted steel beams. She moved silently, unlocking the restraints with the edge of her knife, a feat that earned her a sharp look from Cortez, but there was no time for explanations. She sprinted toward the breach, ducking behind overturned vehicles and sandbags, her rifle spitting precise bursts of fire that cut down the first wave of intruders. Soldiers who had doubted her paused mid-fight, eyes wide as they watched her move with the confidence of a veteran, not a pretender. The battle intensified. Explosions tore through the barracks, sending plumes of smoke and fire into the already darkened sky. A comrade fell beside Aurelia, a young soldier she had shared a brief camaraderie with, his blood painting the gravel red. For a heartbeat, fear clawed at her chest, but it was replaced with resolve. Every loss hardened her purpose, every shot fired was an act of defiance, and every calculated movement brought the unit closer to survival. She signaled to Captain Marcus Valerian, the sharpshooter renowned for feats that echoed legends like Rommel, and together they coordinated a counterattack, picking off enemies with ruthless efficiency. A sudden explosion rocked the central supply depot, threatening to ignite a chain reaction. Aurelia's mind raced as she assessed the risk, knowing that hesitation would cost lives. She dove into the heart of the inferno, cutting wires, disarming bombs, and guiding trapped soldiers to safety. Cortez, watching in disbelief, realized that her knowledge and courage were no accident. Even Dragunov, whose trust had seemed impossible to earn, found himself following her lead, the icy grip of doubt slowly thawing under the heat of her actions. Every corner held danger. Every shadow could conceal a sniper's aim. Yet Aurelia pressed on, her bravery a beacon for the unit. She took risks others would never dare, leaping onto enemy vehicles to plant explosives, drawing fire away from her team, and using her tactical mind to turn disadvantage into advantage. The enemy's organized chaos began to falter under her relentless strategy. Each victory was hard-won, soaked with sweat and blood. But with every challenge, her legend grew in real time. By the time the smoke and echoes of gunfire began to fade, Aurelia had transformed from a detained outsider into the pivot around which the base's defense had turned. The soldiers who had questioned her skill and courage now followed her instinctively, their loyalty won through action rather than words. Yet the battle was far from over. The storm had only revealed its teeth, and every heartbeat reminded them that survival demanded constant vigilance. Aurelia stood amidst the chaos, rifle poised, eyes sharp, ready for the next strike, embodying the courage and resolve that would define not just her fate, but the fate of all who depended on her. The battlefield fell into a fragile silence, the kind that arrives only after storms of fire and blood have spent themselves. Smoke curled from shattered vehicles and scorched earth, mingling with the acrid scent of spent gunpowder. Aurelia Veyron stood amidst the ruin, her chest heaving, her uniform streaked with soot and crimson, yet her posture unbroken. Around her, soldiers picked themselves from the rubble, some wounded, some exhausted, but all alive, because of her. The enemy, led by the ruthless Colonel Svarog, had been routed, their retreat chaotic and fractured, leaving behind the evidence of their hubris. The base, though battered, remained intact, a testament to the courage of those who refused to yield. Commander Leonidas Cortez approached, his expression a mix of awe and restrained admiration. He had witnessed Aurelia's unflinching bravery firsthand, the way she had moved with lethal precision, disarmed explosives that could have destroyed them all, and turned what seemed a hopeless defense into victory. Master Sergeant Vladimir Dragunov, once her harshest skeptic, now stood with a rare openness, nodding in acknowledgement of her skill and tenacity. Even the soldiers who had doubted her, whispering behind her back that she was only pretending to be a SEAL, now followed her gaze with newfound respect. Aurelia had not only survived, she had transformed the perception of what courage and leadership could be. The general arrived as the dust began to settle, his presence commanding immediate attention. General Caius Decimus, whose tactical genius had been revered across theaters of war, surveyed the scene with a measured eye. His gaze finally fell on Aurelia, and he stepped forward, the weight of his reputation lending gravity to the moment. "That mark's real," he declared, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the weary soldiers. It was a simple statement, but its meaning resonated like thunder across the canyon. The seal of recognition was complete. Not a rumor, not a test of appearances, but the undeniable proof of her ability, forged in the crucible of combat. The consequences rippled outward. The unit, once fractured by doubt and suspicion, found new cohesion under her unspoken leadership. Soldiers who had questioned loyalty and skill now emulated her determination, inspired by the example she had set under fire. Families of the fallen received news of survival and valor, their grief tempered with pride. Aurelia's impact extended beyond tactical victories. She had shifted hearts and minds, proving that courage was measured not by gender or expectation, but by action, sacrifice, and resolve. Yet victory carried its scars. The battlefield had demanded sacrifices, leaving indelible marks on everyone who had fought. Aurelia herself bore the memories of those moments, the sight of comrades felled beside her, the deafening explosions that threatened to erase her presence, the weight of decisions made in the split second between life and death. She carried these silently, understanding that heroism often went unseen, uncelebrated, and that true courage was as much in endurance as in triumph. As helicopters lifted off to survey the surrounding valley, Aurelia stood at the edge of the base, rain beginning to fall, washing the grime and blood from her uniform, but never from her memory. She watched the horizon, eyes sharp, mind alert, a sentinel ready for whatever storm might come next. The soldiers behind her moved with renewed purpose, their trust earned not by words, but by her deeds. And in that moment, amidst the battered ruins and the echoes of battle, Aurelia Veyron became more than a warrior. She became a legend whose mark would never fade. Her courage had not only won the day, it had carved a legacy. The war would continue, but those who had witnessed her resolve would carry its memory forever, a story of defiance, bravery, and unyielding honor.